If you're running a startup, you've probably received the advice that you need to get a freedom to operate search done before launching your product. But what if I told you that doing such a search could actually increase your legal risk and potentially kill your business? I'm going to talk about freedom to operate searches and freedom to operate opinions on this video. And we're going to look at some of the downsides of having a freedom to operate search performed. Hi, my name is Carr Ferrell. I'm a Silicon Valley patent attorney. Welcome back to my channel. So what is a freedom to operate search? Well, a freedom to operate search is a patent search that's performed to look for patents that might be infringed by your product or by your company. This is different from a patent novelty search, where you're searching patents and literature to determine whether your product is new and patentable. In a freedom to operate search, you're looking for infringement risk to determine whether any other patents might be infringed by your product. Freedom to operate searches are usually recommended by well-meaning advisors. They seem like the logical thing to do, to search to see whether your product or service might be infringing a patent. You're doing something that seems useful, but they're extremely risky. The reality is that there are almost 4 million active enforceable US patents, and there's almost 20 million worldwide patents that could be potentially infringed by your product. If you go looking for trouble, you're probably going to find trouble. And then the question arises, what are you going to do if you find a patent that you think might be infringed? Or worse yet, you're not sure whether the patent is being infringed by your product or not. So let's go a little deeper on some of the problems that these freedom to operate searches can create. One of the problems of doing an infringement search is that if you find a patent that you think might be infringed and you know of the patent, you can't unknow it. And there's consequences associated with knowing about a patent that you might be infringing. If you're sued for patent infringement on a patent that you believe might already be infringed, then the infringement is willful. And there's enhanced damages that get associated with willful infringement. Potentially even a bigger risk of knowing about a patent that you think might be infringed is the paralysis and distraction that's caused by knowing about the patent. And in startup situations, it's not so uncommon that these distractions can get writ large, where the patent infringement becomes the topic of discussion among developers. There can be a lot of hand-wringing and moral debate among the developers and the engineers as to whether someone outside the company should be notified of the potential infringement. And in the worst of cases, anonymous posts start showing up in Reddit and developer forums asking it for advice on how to handle these infringement issues within the company. A separate risk in believing that there's a patent that might be infringed is the fact that you're going to need to disclose that information to potential future investors. This is almost always a due diligence question that comes up. Are there any patents that are believed to be infringed by the company or the product? And if you have knowledge of potential infringement, then you need to share this with the investors. And it's easy to see that the investors may get cold feet and just decide not to pursue the investment further. And even if the investors decide to proceed, it's pretty easy to see that there's going to be a valuation hit associated with the risk of this unknown patent infringement matter. It's important to understand that even if you have a freedom to operate search performed, it's not legally determinative and it's not conclusive. The way we perform an infringement search is to compare the claims of the relevant patents against the product being evaluated. By its very nature, the value of the search is always limited by the scope of the searcher's understanding of the invention. Also, only publicly available patents can be searched, so those patent applications that have not yet been published are not available for search. Thus, a freedom to operate search is only a search that's performed at a point in time. And in performing these searches, it's not so unusual that key patents get missed and patent claims get misinterpreted. Now, a point to make here is that patent claims are complicated. They're difficult at times to understand and to interpret. I've spent my entire career reading patents. I've supervised the preparation and filing of more than 10,000 patent applications at our firm. And even with all that experience, my interpretation of a patent claim may be completely different from that of a judge or a jury or a skilled patent examiner. It's certainly one of the weaknesses of our patent system that patents are construed based on words. And these words can vary in meaning based on context and the way they're organized. Patent claim construction and interpretation is not an exact mathematical science. And I think it can be a mistake to put too much value on these freedom to operate searches in the early life cycle of a startup company. And finally, these freedom to operate searches can be expensive. They're more complex than mere novelty or patentability searches. They require skill and expertise of a competent patent attorney. And the reality is that for most startups, the product is going to pivot and change anyway over time. And so even after spending the money on getting a freedom to operate search, it's very likely that as time passes, the product will change and the search will have become less and less relevant. Now, there is a particular situation where you may be required or asked to get a freedom to operate search. And this is when you're seeking funding or trying to raise money for your startup. The investor comes to you and says, before I invest my money, I want you to have a freedom to operate search performed. I want to make sure that you're not infringing anyone else's patents. The best way to respond to this, and this is a reasonable request, the best way to respond to this is say, investor, if you want to have a freedom to operate search performed, then you should have the search performed, and whatever you find out from the search, we don't want to know. The search results will be your private information. We don't want you to share that information with us. The reason for this is that if the investor has a freedom to operate search performed and then gives you the results of the search, asking you to explain the search results, then you'll be in a position that you'll have to share those search results with all future investors. It's almost always a question in due diligence as to whether or not you've had a freedom to operate search performed. And this is also an important point for investors. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a freedom to operate search performed on a future or potential portfolio company. However, it's a bad idea to share those results with the company that you're considering investing in. Treat these search results as your trade secret. This is information that you have that future investors may not have. When it comes to valuation discovery, use this information to inform your own investment decisions, but don't share this information with the company who will then be required to share it with future investors to the detriment of your present investment. Okay, to change positions slightly, there are some circumstances where a freedom to operate search makes a lot of sense. If there's another very similar product in the marketplace and you're going to make a copy of it, or you're going to do a slight modification of that existing product, then I think it makes a lot of sense to do a patent search on that product based on patents from that specific company. So you identify the company, search for patents assigned to that company, and then check those patents to see if there are any patents that are covering that product. This is a very easy search to perform, and it can save you a lot of grief down the road once you start selling product. A second circumstance in which a freedom to operate search to me makes a lot of sense is when you've been informed by a credible source that there may be a patent that your proposed product may be infringing. Now, the operative term here is credible source. If somebody walks up to you in a trade show and says, oh yes, I have a bunch of patents that cover that product, I wouldn't spend a lot of time and energy doing a freedom to operate search. However, if you're notified by a supplier or distributor or retailer or some other credible business source that you may be infringing a known patent, then I think in that case, a search may make a lot of sense. And I think another circumstance where a freedom to operate search may make a lot of sense is when you're integrating a critical component from a sole source supplier. That is, the component is critical to you being able to produce your product, and that component is only available from one source. In that case, it may make a lot of sense to perform a freedom to operate search just to make sure that you can purchase and use that component without infringing a third-party patent. Okay, that's all I have to say today about freedom to operate searches. It's a super interesting area, and there's a lot of debate that can be had as to whether a freedom to operate search should be done or should be skipped. If you have some thoughts on it, put them in the comments section below. I'd love to read your thoughts. If you need some help with your patent strategy, you can reach me at the email address below. I'd love to chat with you. In the meantime, I'll see you on the next video.